Hey everybody, and welcome to the shop. Today we're going to be working on the Cutlass a little bit. I'm going to be taking apart the dash area and cowl area. I've got some vintage air parts going in the car. You might be wondering why I'm putting vintage air stuff in a race car, but I'll show you that when we get to it. And also just kind of making room to go ahead and mock up the engine in the car, as well as a few other things. Got to set up for doing engine plates and all sorts of stuff. So let's check it out. Welcome to the Keefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Keefer. Hey guys, and welcome back. So one thing I'm going to be making room for in the Cutlass today is this AC unit from Vintage Air. One thing I really like about this is it's really compact, and another thing that really sold me this unit was that it uses this metal firewall cover. And I like that as a safety component. I think it's going to protect the cabin of the car against engine fires a lot better than that composite fiberglass plastic unit that GM put in the car. Now, if you're looking for a detailed installation of this unit, Vintage Air actually has a really good install video that they did with a Monte Carlo SS, and they also provide this detailed installation guide with the kit. So this goes over all the steps as well as that video, but today I kind of want to show you maybe some of the nuances of the Cutlass installation, mainly just how to pull the dash out of the car. I'll also be taking some of the stuff in the cowl out of the way and actually removing that old unit to get this one in, so I'll show you how to do that in detail. So this is the main AC unit here in the back, and it's one of their new compact Generation 4 units. You can see how it attaches to this metal firewall cover and fits in there really tight. Today we're going to be looking at how this is all mounted and also how some of the lines route out of that firewall cover. So back here at the car, you can just see how gargantuan the engine compartment component of the factory AC system is. It takes up a lot of room, and it's going to be nice to be able to clear that out of the way and just have that compact Vintage Air unit poking out just barely into the engine compartment, and also give me that nice metal firewall cover. Now, it's included in the Vintage Air instructions that they want you to go ahead and pull out the passenger side wheel well on the front end there, but I've gone ahead and I've pulled the whole front end off of this car. I needed to do that anyway for the other things I'm doing. So if you're interested in knowing how to do that, I've got a whole video on that on the channel, and you can go watch that. It's kind of a quick one, and it just kind of goes over how to pull the front end off one of these cars. One thing I left out in that video that you might want to do is to actually pull the connectors, the plugs off of the turn signal lights in the front bumper. Just kind of a little note that I left out of that video if you want to go watch that. Alright, so to start the process of making some room in the car, I'm going to go ahead and take the seats out. I've actually just moved them kind of back into the rear footwell area, and that's just going to help make some room just for working on everything. Now, what you're going to want to do early on is go ahead and pull the glove box out of the car. There's just 4 screws holding that in, and they actually use a 7mm socket. So go ahead, drop those 4 screws, unlatch it, undo your little limiting wire there, and pull that out. I've already done that in this car, and this car is also already devoid of a radio. So you'll want to go ahead and pull the radio out as well. But next we're going to move on to pulling some more stuff out of the way to work on that AC. So another thing I've already done in this car is I've actually pulled the cover under the steering column out. And so that looks like this, and on Cutlasses I think it pretty much always has this vent on it. And then once you drop that down, there's 4 screws in it as well. There's a couple different kinds of screws. There's Phillips and the 7mm hexagon headed screws. Once you pull that out, this will be, this is actually a AC or heat duct, and it's going to be situated up in this area, and it's actually clipped on to a hose on either side. One side actually goes up to the vent to the left of all the instruments, and the other connects to this hose, which leads back to the air box. So go ahead and pull all of that out of the way so you can access the steering column and get this lower cover off, and we'll do that next. Alright, so we'll go ahead and pull this under column bracket out. It's typically got 4 13mm headed bolts. One's missing in my case, but let's go ahead and pull those off. And next we'll go ahead and pull these 2 main bolts out. Hold that up. Alright, and that's going to allow the column to move around a little bit and give us some access to all this wiring. Another thing that needs to be done is all these wiring connectors will eventually need to be unplugged to pull the dash out and the wiring harness. Obviously this car has been modified a little bit, but basically this is your headlight dimmer switch, so high beam, low beam switch, and you click this thing, it moves that, and these are your basic lights and horn and all that kind of stuff, and then windshield wipers hook up here too. This stuff is usually a little better organized, but I think somebody switched the column out in this. But one thing you're definitely going to want to do is pull this clip off. Might need like a screwdriver or something to do that. This wire actually goes to the gear indicator on your instrument cluster. So just pop that off the column there, and it'll leave a scratch mark where it goes, or you can kind of recalibrate it when you reassemble it. But just need to get all that stuff disconnected, and then we can move on to pulling the AC unit out. Alright, so I went ahead and popped that clip off on the gear indicator thing, and just to kind of show you, if you pull on that, it moves the needle on the gear indicator. Kind of cool. Really simple. To pull the headlight dimmer wires, you want to squeeze either side these little tangs on this connector, and then just wiggle it out. Just so you know, yellow is power from the headlight switch, green is your high beams, one of these just goes to the dash, to the indicator light, and tan is your low beam headlights. Alright, and it would have been really difficult to show on camera, but these connectors for your windshield wipers and for the lights and horn and all that, it just kind of pulls down. This main light one kind of sits up in that metal kind of clip there, and then they just pull apart after you kind of push on this tab. So I've got all that pulled apart. Somebody has scotched, whatever those are called, put this together, so I'm gonna just kind of pull those apart. I'll have to clip these, but then once I get everything separated, that should be good for the column. This back here, this is all like cruise control stuff. To my memory, I think that stays with the car mostly, including this vacuum line and all these wires that go to this grommet directly under the master cylinder. One thing I will have to do is go ahead and pull the fuse block out. At this point, if you have not pulled your front wiring harness out and or front end of the car, you'll want to do that. One weird thing about GMs is, at least G Bodies, the tail harness and all the accessories and stuff actually plugs in to the side of the fuse block here, and the fuse block goes with the dash. You can see all the wires coming out of the top. That all goes to the dash. This is your tail light cluster here, including third brake light. That's the blue and black, backup lights, all that stuff. And this actually is your dome light circuit. So get all that unplugged from the fuse block, and along with this wire, which this one goes into that cruise control harness. Just take note of where that goes in the fuse block, and then these just unclip and just pull them out. If you have power windows, power locks, all that kind of stuff, it'll plug into the front of this with these kind of things. They'll be big orange ones typically. So once I get all that pulled apart, we'll move on to some other stuff. Alright, so here's the dome light and tail light harness. It stays with the car when you pull the dash and the fuse box and everything out. But to get it out, what I ended up doing is just jamming a screwdriver kind of into that area there. And it actually pushes this tab over on the fuse box here, if you can see that. And it releases it and you can pull this out. Now you're going to want to take these two screws. They're 7mm. Once again, it's kind of a theme on these things. There you can see that. Now you'll want to go ahead and take those out, and that will liberate the wiring from the car in this area. Perfect. These cars are actually equipped with a couple of brake light switches. Actually only one's for the brake lights. This 3-pin one kind of hanging out the bottom here is for the lights, and it needs to be pulled out because this wiring goes with the dash. This other stuff stays. This is cruise control. Alright, and I went ahead and got this out. It took a lot of pushing on this tab and wiggling it out, so I didn't catch it on camera. But just for your information, this is the third brake light wire. So this is the power from the fuse, the orange one. This white one goes to the turn signal switch. So your brake lights are actually the left and right turn signal, since the third brake light is neither of the rear turn signals. It's a dedicated circuit, and it goes all the way to the tail light area on the driver's side, and then comes back forward to that stand. You can kind of see the wire sticking out there, and powers that third brake light in the rear window. This tan wire, so any tan wire you find that has a white tracer on it, is for the brake system. So it's either the parking brake warning light that I just unplugged, or the proportioning valve has a differential switch. So if there's fluid missing from the front or the back, there's like a pin in there. Typically this is how it works, and then there's a little notch in that pin, and when it gets out of center, it'll turn a switch on and turn the brake lights on, or the brake warning light on the dash. So tan and white, that's what that circuit is. Alright, so while we're over here on the driver's side pulling stuff apart with the column, now that that's pretty much all unhooked, I want to go ahead and actually remove this whole part of the dash. This is separate from the rest, and one of the first things I'm going to need to do is actually pull these two wood grain panels out, and they really just kind of pull straight out. They're on clips. You have to be careful not to break them, obviously, but if you just get them in the right spot, there's like these springs. This one's broken already, so don't have to be real careful with it, but I don't want it any worse than it is. Alright, cool. This one being broken is making it kind of difficult actually to pull out. I don't want to break it any worse than it is, but here it goes. And this piece will come out separately in this particular instance, but if I really wanted to, that looks like it's glueable, but you can kind of see these little clips in the back and just how they attach to the dash. And this will give access to some of the fasteners for this piece. I'll also want to pull the one that's around the light switch out. It's easiest to start from the vent. And and then work your way around this light switch here. It comes out like this. You can see the clips. Some of these fasteners are kind of hidden, so you'll have to get up in there, but once again, 7 millimeters, and I believe there's just these 3 up here. And then there's 4 across the bottom. This car is already missing 1. Actually, I guess it's missing a couple of them. So somebody must have been looking out for me. Anyway, go ahead and pull that to the side. Next, we'll go ahead and work on pulling out the instrument cluster. Once again, 7 millimeter fasteners. They're a little bit different than the other ones. They have a bigger washer, so you'll want to set those aside and keep track of them. The 7 millimeter nut driver is a really great tool for this, so if you don't have a set of nut drivers, it might be worth the investment. I use them a lot. Now, pulling this out of the car isn't just as easy as it is said. There is a speedometer cable that you have to deal with, and there's a certain technique to pulling that cable loose from the cluster. The cluster does pull straight out of the dash, considering the wiring. Once you find that speedometer cable, you have to squeeze it a certain way, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, cool. So you're just going to want to push on this, and it will release that speedometer cable housing, or the end of the speedometer cable. So at this point, now that I have the speedometer cable disconnected, I'm just going to put it back down in there, and I'll go ahead and just put this piece, the actual instrument cluster, back up into the dash. It'll come out with the dash. I'll even just go ahead and install one of these screws back in the cluster just so that it doesn't fall out. Alright, so over here on the passenger side, we're looking in where the glove box usually would be. And what I'm going to need to do is unplug this system of vacuum lines. So there's kind of like a little clip on this one side, and then they just unplug like that. And then the same with this electrical connection. And now that liberates most of the AC stuff. And then this should mostly come out of the way after I get the control panel out. So that's looking good. I think I will go ahead and pull this clip loose. It just kind of snaps closed. I'll go ahead and drop this stuff out. This also holds the radio antenna wire. So I'm going to need that to be loose. Next, I'm going to go ahead and pull the control panel out. This is 4 7mm screws. And this top screw is a little tight, so I'm just going to pull it out manually here. Alright, now that that's loose, there's one more thing that I'm going to want to pull loose from the air box over there. I want to go ahead and pull this cable off, so it goes from that head unit over to the top of the box, kind of near the middle of the dash, inside of the glove box area. I won't be cutting anything, hopefully. So I can't remember if I've ever actually been able to save one of these cables, but there's like this little pressed on kind of serrated metal thing that needs to be pulled off of this. It's actually a bell crank up here. I'll I'll give you all a closer look if I can. Maybe you can kind of see what it's doing there. So it's both the blend door and it has linkage to another part. I think it's another flap up at the front. Just AC, heat, blend kind of deal. I think what I'll do is go ahead, I will clip this little clip and sacrifice it. So that'll get this part of the cable off of that little bell crank, but the hard part is up here. These things have like 2 barbs, and it's like this little thing that fits into a rectangle on the actual air box. Let's see. Nah, it's all right. It's already a little broken anyway. Just wiggle that out. Cool. All right, and only totally ruined it. So, all right, now that the cable's out, I'll be able to pull this head unit out of here, and need to take that light loose. Right, it clips into here just like a Christmas tree clip, so that needs to be pulled loose. And there's the cable I just took loose, and then this harness here plugs into there. Just flip that, comes off. Likewise this one, just get that loose. This guy, set it aside. It's got one connection up here, and I believe this is the main power. We'll take that loose, and you can plug it back into that or whatever you'd like. Now there's just a couple bolts to take loose from the air box. All right, so one thing that the Vintage Air instructions go over that they suggest to go ahead and do is to take a couple of duck bolts out. Some of these do have to come out for the removal of the dash, just because everything's really intertwined on these cars. And you can get to these two behind the radio and the factory AC controls. So we'll just go ahead, pull these two out, and have them out of the way. Once those two are out, this heating duct on the bottom is also supported by this screw. And once that's off, you can pull the floor heater duct out of the way. One thing about this car, it already has the computer removed. This harness plugs into the computer harness that actually goes out of this hole here into the engine compartment, directly into the back of the wheel well. And the computer's out. It has like a little basket that's built into the kick panel, and that's just for like 86, 87, 88, maybe 85, not sure, but I know 86 and 87 have them. Next, I'll go ahead and just keep pulling some stuff loose. Here's something that's really tricky. So there's actually like a relay back here, and it powers a couple things. One being the power antenna. You will have to disconnect these wires to remove the dash. So I'm gonna go ahead and work on that. It's really tight. It'd be hard to capture that successfully on film, I think. I did get this relay unplugged. It was really in there for some reason. I actually had to just stick a screwdriver in there to pop these tabs loose. And there's actually 2 3-prong sets of wires that go to that same relay. So those come out, one's plugged in one way, one's plugged in the other. And here you can kind of see it in there. Maybe you could get to that screw and just take it all out, but they're in there pretty good, but I got them unplugged. So. Also for this, you're gonna have to find a 10mm socket and go ahead, go ahead and remove that ground wire. It's actually the ground for the AC. Here in a sec, we'll also have to pull this off, which is the dash mount. We'll go ahead and do those last, but first, we'll pull some of these out of the top. Take the top of the dash off. There's 4 screws, and 2 of them are real obvious in the defrost vents there, but the other 2 are actually under these speaker grills. And these things, pretty brittle, just from being in the sun, but usually you can coax them off the car without totally shattering them. So I'm going to try to do that. There's one on the outside. Cool. This pops off like that, and surprisingly didn't bust into a million pieces. There's your little tiny speaker from 1987, and right next to it is the hidden screw. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that screw out. And then I'll go ahead and pull this one out of the heater duct as well. Perfect. Alright, let's go ahead and pop this side loose as well. Perfect. Came out nicely. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and get that bolt out. And its buddy over here in the defroster duct. Perfect. Alright, so now that the upper dash support bolts are out, going to want to go ahead and pop these off under here. These are 10mm headed. And there's one on either side, and then the other one, you can see that metal strap. It goes down to here. You'll have to kind of find the head of the bolt up through this hole. Go ahead and drop that out. All right, and here's the one on the driver's side. Go ahead and drop that bolt too. All right, so my inner screws really didn't come out the first time. I was kind of joking, but when I said, oh, perfect, but I had to actually put a screwdriver under and pry it while I hit it with a little mini impact gun, and I eventually got these 2 to come out. Another thing is, this car, you know, has been partially dismantled in the past. I've got this pulled out a little bit, but there's a bolt which I believe should be through that oval hole, and then I pulled this out, but this lines up with that, and there's like a little, I think it's 10mm headed bolt. It's kind of a screw pointed bolt, if I remember correctly. It should be screwed up through all of that, like into the dash structure, I think it goes. This car is missing that. Yours probably isn't, so go ahead and drop that. And then the dash structure is above this plate, which kind of, it like bolts up into the cowl of the car and supports the column, but this is slotted, the actual dash part, so it will slide past that as long as the column support bolts, those 2 studs, as long as those nuts are loose. All right, and here's the trickiest thing about removing these Cutlass dashes. You have to pull this off, so it just pulls straight out. It's got those same spring clips as everything else. This end is hard because it kind of wedges into the corner here. Perfect. And so this needs to come out. And just like everything else, it's a 7mm headed fastener. And once that comes out, now the dash is loose from the ducting system and all that. And it's really super loose. All right, now that everything is presumably loose, let's go ahead and just pull this dash straight out. Cool, there it goes. And now I'm actually gonna kind of look under this side, the driver's side, and guide the wiring out. All right, and I knew I was forgetting something. The key switch, all the power stuff needs to unplug from the top of the column. And so now I'm just gonna work on pulling this stuff out from around the column here. Just wanna get all these wires back over here so they're not all tangled up as I go ahead and pull the dash out of the car with the dash wiring. All right, and as I was routing wires, there are a couple more I forgot about. The first one being blue and green. It's your backup light switch, and it's on the top of the column. So honestly, one more reason to go ahead and remove this column first before the dash is just getting all this stuff. And the other, this might be neutral safety or something. I actually am not off the top of my mind sure what this is, but it goes to the same switch at the top of the column. Maybe you can see it. Stuff plugs into that, and that's got to be unplugged as well. But at this point, I've got pretty much all the wire separated, and there might just be a couple more things I need to unplug. Actually, yeah, this thing, it's on the column, but it goes to this, and that's part of the cruise control as well. This pink and purple set needs to be unplugged from the cruise control, and it has some hooks that grab onto that second brake switch. All right, got that loose. Now I'm just going to pull this all out. All right, now that all the wiring is completely freed, let's go ahead, pick this thing up. I'll start to slide it out of the car while I go ahead and undo the parking brake release cable. All right, and for that parking brake release cable, I just pulled it loose, so you just pull the cable out slightly, pop it off of this part, and then you have to kind of pry that cable, that kind of aqua green colored piece out, and it goes with the dash. All right, support all this. This radio wiring, this is speaker wire. It stays with the car. This is an aftermarket oil pressure gauge tube. And looks like everything's loose. So I'm gonna go ahead and make sure nothing's wrapped around my shifter, my column shifter here. This is a big piece of gauge 10 or 12 wire. I guess some of the main wiring had gone out, and it was an aftermarket repair for the key switch, but it's all good to go. Let's go ahead and shuttle the dash out of the car. All right, well, that's one heck of a job, but here it is. The dash out of the car. Cool. Yeah, a lot of this wiring in this car was kind of been repaired and stuff over the years. I'm going to be redoing all of that. Obviously, if you're wanting to take your dash out, just be really careful and carefully remove all of the things I listed. I might be tempted to drop the column all the way out of the car just so I can get to those switches at the top. You know, if your radio and stuff's still in the car, there's 3 plugs at the back you'll want to undo, plus I think there's like a power plug. But the main dash harness stays with the dash, as well as the fuse block, as well as, you know, stuff like that. So if you've got remote mirror, you're going to need to disconnect that. I believe I did the black car. It's got a remote mirror. I think I disconnected that from the door and slid the cable out. It goes right here. But regardless, you know, just don't forget those. Don't forget that bolt that's under this trim panel. And don't forget your speedometer cable, and you'll be all right. Also, take a good picture of what you unplug from the fuse block when you unplug all the little wires out of it. there's really, I think they're pretty specific how they go back, but if you've got power windows and power locks and all that, you'll know what I mean. There'll be a ton of orange wires under the dash. Regardless, got it all out of the way, and now it's just time to pull that factory stock AC system out of the car. All right, so now it's time to pull this out of here. Obviously, if your car is intact and all together, you'll want to go ahead, properly discharge the system, and pull all the lines loose from this, and also at the very least pull your wheel well for the passenger front here out. You need to do that because there's bolts for this AC box down on this side, but also it has to kind of come out off to the side. It's such a big system in there that you're just going to need that room to pull it out of the car, and once again just kind of get to all that stuff. So since I've got all that out of the way, the first thing I want to get out of the way before I forget, there's actually a ground strap on the firewall, and I'm going to want to go ahead and unscrew that now. All right, and that ground strap would typically ride right behind the distributor. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull that out. 10mm headed screw, and it's usually got a bunch of this undercoating on it. So we'll just go ahead and pull that loose. All right, so I want to start pulling stuff on the outside of the car apart by removing this piece of weather stripping. These are usually in pretty good shape. You should keep it and just put it aside for right now. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and remove this lower windshield trim. It's stainless steel, and you're going to want to pull all these screws out along with the windshield wiper stoppers and all that kind of stuff that's holding it down. While you're doing this, just kind of keep track of where these go. Take a picture or whatever you need to do. All right, go ahead and slide that out from under the windshield molding, and go ahead and pull it off and set it to the side. After that trim's out of the way, and you might want to give this like a little vacuuming, there's usually a lot of leaf debris and stuff in here, you'll want to go ahead and pull the screen out. Alright, and let's get that out of the way to expose these mounting bolts for the original AC box. Alright, so it's finally time to pull this behemoth out of the car. So let's go ahead and start pulling these 10mm headed fasteners out of the way. Don't forget the ones on the bottom. And there's a couple on the side as well. Now let's go ahead and get these ones on the top. And next we should be able to pull this guy out of here. Before you pull it all the way out, go ahead and trace this blue vacuum line all the way to a little vacuum motor that's right by the steering column and pull it loose. Now you can take it out of the car. Alright, cool. So now we've got that factory AC unit out of there. Man, that is one man-sized hole. That is a lot of real estate right there. And here's the unit. still in pretty good shape. If I ever needed to restore one of these G bodies, I could probably reuse it. And actually, if any of you guys are curious, you can get all new like evaporator cores, heater cores, this accumulator unit here with some desiccant in it, lines and all that kind of stuff from various companies. But now it's time to go ahead and start installing that new unit from Vintage Air. All right, so here's the inside of the car with the unit out, and one more thing that needs to be done is all this factory ducting needs to be removed. I also wanted to show you guys where I unplugged that vacuum hose from, and it's right here next to the steering column. That blue hose that I was referring to earlier. Bunch of 7mm stuff, so I'm going to go ahead, pull all this stuff loose, and then I'll be able to remove this factory dash support bracket. Vintage Air supplies a new one that fits with their unit. Now it's time to go ahead and pull this bracket out. Alright, and I want to go ahead and keep this factory hardware because I'm going to use this to mount the new bracket that comes from Vintage Air. Now that we've got the dash and everything out of the car, there's a few parts of the air conditioning system that we're going to need to pre-assemble on the bench. After you remove these 4 pre-installed bolts from the nutserts and the airbox assembly, you're going to want to go ahead and install this bracket. And it goes on like so, with these 2 tubes going through the holes in the bracket. Next, we'll go ahead and reinstall these 4 bolts to hold the bracket onto the air box. And after we start all 4 of them, we'll go ahead and cinch them down with this ratchet and 3/8 socket. At this time, the instructions call for the installation of these evaporator lines going here and here. But I'm actually going to leave these off right now because I'm not going to be charging this system for a while. And this evaporator core is actually pressurized and sealed off. And I don't want to open that right now. It's a good idea to keep that sealed until you're ready to do the final installation. I will go ahead and hook up the heater lines on this today just to kind of show you the process of installing these and lining them up with the cover for the firewall that this actually bolts onto. Alright, and you might have heard that little hiss. This is stored under vacuum. I guess just to keep everything nice and dry until it's ready to be installed. But for the installation of these heater lines, I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple number 10 O-rings out of the parts bag here. We'll go ahead and take the supplied oil, clip the tip of that applicator off, then we'll go ahead and lubricate the first O-ring. I'm going to make sure to get it all over that O-ring. And now we'll go ahead and slide that O-ring onto the male part of the fitting on this tube here. Make sure it's seated in there. And we'll give it a little extra oil just to make sure everything seals up nicely. And then we'll go ahead and install it onto the heater core. We'll just get it finger tight for right now. And we'll do the same thing for the other one. Making sure to lubricate that O-ring well. We'll go ahead and put it up onto the fitting. And we'll give it a little extra oil just so we don't tear it. Finally, we'll go ahead and install this one onto the heater core as well. Just getting it finger tight. Alright, so next I want to go ahead and take this firewall cover and I'm going to line the 2 upper holes in this bracket up with these 2 studs, and then this is going to slide over the bottom of this bracket here. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of check out how these tubes line up before I tighten them down and make sure they're positioned properly. Alright, so that's where that's going to sit. I'm just going to make sure these tubes are in a good spot, poking through the holes. And now I'm going to go ahead, carefully pull this off and tighten the tubes down. Once you're happy with the position of the lines, you're going to go ahead and take a 7/8 and 1 1/16 inch wrench. Go ahead and secure that heater core and tighten the nut. Alright, and once you've got your hard line secured to the AC unit, now it's time to go ahead and mount it to the firewall cover. So we're going to go ahead, lay it in place. It's going to mount on these two studs and this tab using a couple screws and a couple nylock nuts included with the kit. So you're going to want to go ahead and start by lining those two bolt holes up, sliding them down the studs. And then the bottom of the unit rolls onto that tab. Alright, so down here at the bottom of the unit where this tab is, we're going to go ahead and use a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver to locate the screws in place. Go ahead and start them threading in. After we start the first one, we'll go ahead and get that second one in there. We'll want to make sure the unit's sitting flat on the bracket. Then we'll go ahead and cinch both of these down. Up here on the top side of the unit, we'll go ahead and install the nuts. Now, instead of those nylocks for this mock-up, I'm just using some regular nuts. I don't want to use the nylon locking system up on those other nuts quite yet. Once those are finger tight, we'll go ahead and use a 7/16 deep well socket on an extender with a ratchet to cinch those down. One thing I'd like to add that they do point out in the instructions is, before you go ahead and install this airbox assembly to the firewall panel, you can take some adhesive insulation mat and stick it around in the inside with a 1/4 inch maximum thickness. Now once you're at this stage, for the final installation, you'd go ahead and install this neoprene gasket over the hoses. It stretches, and I think I'd probably use like a silicone lubricant or something over these lines. And then to lock all that in, you'd go ahead and screw this plate in place over that gasket, securing everything. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and install the unit assembled onto the firewall cover into the car. Now for your final installation, you're going to want to go ahead and run a bead of silicone all the way around this, or maybe on the car, just to seal everything up. And you're also going to want to go ahead and put silicone on your bolts as you install them into the firewall. We're going to start with this heater plenum. Going to stick it in like that. Make sure it's all tucked into the insulation. And then just going to kind of wiggle this thing into place. Once you get the bottom in, eventually it's just going to kind of sit down like this. And now we're going to take one of the 11 supplied little bolts. It's kind of like a threaded screw with a washer built into it. Going to go ahead and pick up on this and line up one of the holes and install that by hand. Now when you're ready to go ahead and tighten all these down, it just uses a 10mm socket, cinch all 11 down, and it'll be installed. Alright, and if you're going to use power tools or really anything else on this, just make sure you don't tighten it too hard, warping the surface and messing up the seal. Alright, so now that this unit is put in place, we're going to go ahead and move to the inside of the car. And next step is going to be to secure this AC unit to the dash using this support bracket included in the kit. Now, this is going to mount onto the unit using a couple of bolts you're going to pull out, kind of like we pulled out from the other side when we mounted it to that firewall plate. It's going to bolt on like so, with a bolt here and a bolt here. Then you're going to use a couple of supplied sheet metal screws to secure this to the cowl structure of the car. Now, for the typical install, they want you to go ahead and bolt this in place like so. And you're going to go ahead and just leave this cowl insulation alone and use these two slotted holes as a template to put the sheet metal screws into the cowl to support the bracket. Now, since I'm pulling a bunch of stuff out of this car anyway, and I'm going to be building this into a custom race car, I'm actually going to go ahead and pull this insulation out of the way first, and we'll check that step out in just a sec. The bottom of this insulation is secured with some push pins that actually go through this wiring harness holder. I've already gotten it loose. It kind of uses these Christmas tree clips that poke through everything and look like so. I've actually got a special tool for pulling those out that I got from Eastwood, and they just hook on like there and pull it out really nicely. Now for the top, kind of a similar process. It just uses these clips on top. And I've got a bigger tool for that. I'm going to try to pull those out real nice and smooth right now. Alright, that pulled out pretty nicely, and if I wanted to put it back later, I could. I can just hold on to these little Christmas tree clips and stick everything back together. Alright, so let's go ahead, and now that I've got that out of the way, let's take a look at this bracket in place here. Next, I'll go ahead and mock it up with the bolts. Alright, and once we've got this bracket on here, the next step is going to be to make sure that this unit is level so that all of the condensation off of the AC evaporator that collects in the bottom of the unit properly drains out of the drain port in the bottom corner right here. One thing I've been working on is actually doing some of the final fit up work on this bracket. It's really close, but I'm just tweaking it a little bit to fit really nicely. And the tool I'm using to do that is actually this, I call it a hand brake. I'm not sure what it's called commercially, but this thing, it's like 6 inches wide, and it just squeezes the metal flat. And you can use it to adjust tabs and even straighten stuff out, and it's really great. One thing that I actually want to do is contour the top of this bracket to better match with the cowl of this car. So I'm going to curve this a little bit, and I'm going to use this this pair of pliers, handbrake, whatever you may call it, and just go ahead and do that right now. What I'm going to do is just grab it right at the spot that I want to bend it at, and make sure it's nice and straight. Clamp it really tight, and just grab it wherever I can, you know, get it nice and sturdy. Bend it some, and you can see what a clean, nice bend that makes. I'll go ahead and see how that looks, and it's starting to really match the contour of that cowl. I'm going to give it one more little tweak here. Alright, cool, that's looking good. Now that I've given this a little bit of a tweaking just to get it fitted nicely, I'm going to kind of return to our regularly scheduled programming here and get back to the installation. I'm going to go ahead and bolt this onto the AC unit here with both of these bolts. I've just got a 10 millimeter socket here. Alrighty. Alright, now that this is in place, we want to once again make sure this is nice and level. Now, you do have a little bit of adjustment as this bracket is slotted here at the top. So you can tilt it a little bit, and what they suggest is you use like a bubble stick or something like that across the bottom of the unit. Now, this car is not sitting as it will with all the final suspension and wheels and tires under it. So what I'm going to do is just kind of visually get it close where I like it, and then I'm going to use that slot to my advantage and go ahead and use the Sharpie to mark right in the center. And I'll get a couple holes started in this. And then when it's time for the final installation later, since this is just a mock-up, then I can kind of fine-tune how that sits in the car. Alright, so went ahead and pulled the bracket back off after making the marks. I'm going to go ahead and drill a 1/8 pilot hole for those sheet metal screws. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and drill these 1/8 holes up to number 29 bit, which is like a special size for tapping a, it's either a number 8 or number 10 machine screw, but it's just a little bigger than a 1/8, and it's going to work great for those sheet metal screws. Alright, now that I've got those holes drilled out, we'll go ahead and reinstall this bracket. Nice and tight. And now we can finally install those sheet metal screws in this bracket. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I hold it up nice and level while I do that. Get these tight. There we are. Nice and sturdy, looking good. Cool. And one more thing we're going to want to do in here inside of the car is actually to loosely mount the new dash support bracket. So here's the old one, the original one to the car next to this new one, and you can see that the new one just kind of provides more clearance for this vintage air AC box. So I've actually left the factory hardware in the dash, and what I'll do is just go ahead, pull that loose, and then I'll use it to loosely mount this. Don't want to tighten it at this point because it's going to have to be moved around a little bit just to line it up with the dash on the bottom just perfectly. And then we'll be able to reach through the glove box opening and tighten these down when the dash is installed in the car. Alright, so I've got this mounted, so it's still got a little bit of wiggle room. It's in there. You can see how it clears the vintage air box nicely. And to complete this installation, we'll just go ahead and slide the supplied U-nut into place. Alright, perfect. So that's looking good inside the car. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Now that we've got everything all ready in the inside of the car and we got the dash out, I went ahead and I brought the dash over to the workbench here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to prepare the dash for the ducting that leads from that vintage air box with some special fittings that they include in the kit. Alright, so looking at the dash here, there's really 3 major sections that we're going to have to deal with. And it's kind of center, passenger side, and driver side. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and pulled all the screws out of the factory duct pieces, and I went ahead and cleaned them up with some soapy water and scrub brush and a microfiber towel, just to kind of get everything nice and clean. It's nice to clean the ducts when you have a chance. So what we're going to go ahead and start with is installing the vintage air adapters onto these pieces of factory ductwork. Starting in the center here, I'm going to go ahead and pull this out since I have it all unscrewed anyway. What we're going to be adding to this piece, which just kind of is on either side. If you've got a dash clock, it goes right in the middle, but this is just kind of that panel that's right in the middle of the dash. This actually gets this adapter supplied by Vintage Air, and it's going to fit on like so. And it's going to adapt it so that their hoses can hook up to it. Now to attach this, they've actually included these 3 S-clips with the hardware kit. So I'm going to go ahead and take these S-clips, and you just kind of have to wiggle them on there with a little bit of force. I'm going to go ahead and put 2 of these on the top, and then they call for 1 on the bottom. And you're going to leave it so that the outside of the S is on the outside perimeter of this ductwork. Next, we're going to go ahead and take the piece of ductwork that comes with the kit. We're going to capture that onto these S clips. I'm going to catch it in there. I'm going to start them on. Go ahead and slide them all together once they're in place. And now we have the final assembly that can be reinstalled into the dash. And it's installed with 4 7mm hexagon headed screws. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the passenger side ductwork that's above the glove box area. And this actually gets this piece added to the factory ducting. It just kind of slides over there. And what they suggest for you to do is to go ahead and use some silicone to seal this on to the factory piece. Now what you'll probably want to do is use some smaller clamps just to make sure everything's seated and make sure any gaps are closed up. Go ahead and glue that together, let it sit with the clamps, and it'll be reinstalled the same way as the centerpiece with 4 7mm headed screws. Now the final piece we're going to be dealing with setting the dash up for the vintage air ducting is actually the driver's side, and this goes below the steering column. You might recognize this piece. It's got a little vent, and it's also got this piece of ductwork that's screwed onto it. Now I went ahead and removed these 2 screws so I can pull that loose, and what they've done is they've actually included an adapter to go from this to their size tubing. But what you might notice is it doesn't fit directly onto this duct. What you're going to have to do is go pull the factory hose apart. Alright, so I'm over here at my pile of factory parts that I'd pulled out of the car just a little while ago. And if you look at this hose here, I've already removed the end that the factory had stapled together with this hose. Now this is the actual ducting that used to be mounted on the cowl with 4 screws that screwed in kind of right next to where the dash attaches at the top. And what I've done is I pulled those 3 little staples holding this piece and went ahead, pulled it out of the hose here, and went outside and cleaned it up with some soapy water. Alright, so with this part of the factory hose that I just pulled off over there, that's going to be able to clip onto this factory ducting here. It's got 3 kind of barbs on it that clip over this raised barb here. And now that we have this will glue with silicone over that factory piece, which adapts it to the flex hose included with the kit. Alright, so I'm over here at the driver's side of the dash. This is where the steering column goes, and I've got the completed piece of ductwork here with the adapter and that piece of the factory hose. And you can see that this piece matches because this is actually the factory hose leading up to the very left driver's side vent on the dash. And just kind of to clarify, what's going to happen is this will go right back in like factory, clip all together, screw into place with that cover that goes under the column, and then you'll hook up your ductwork from the vintage air system here, and that'll feed all of that. Alright, so the next part of the installation process is actually going to be the AC condenser. And to install that, we're going to have to go ahead and pull the radiator and the original condenser out of the car. And I just happen to have the front end off of this car because I'm working on the rest of it, but it's going to make it nice and easy for me to show you guys kind of how to pull all that apart and how to get that new condenser in the car. Alright, so let's go ahead and start the disassembly process of everything in the core support here. So the first thing you're going to need to do, in your case, if you haven't pulled the front end off of the car, you're going to want to go ahead and loosen the fan up, take the belt off and all of that. Then you're going to need to pull that fan shroud out. Now this is held in with 4 10mm headed fasteners typically. 2 are down here at the bottom. those are already out in my instance here, but there's a couple different styles. Some G bodies have a plastic cover that holds the radiator down and also makes up the top of the shroud, and it's like a two-piece unit. But it's pretty straightforward how it comes apart. So we're going to go ahead and get it out of the way. Let's check it out. Pull that out. And we're going to want to go ahead and hold on to all this hardware. The next thing is going to be to go ahead and remove the top panel here that holds the radiator down into place. This, like I said earlier, this could be built into the top kind of half of your fan shroud as well. So I'll have to get that out of the way next. And to pull this off, there's typically 5 bolts on the top of this thing. In my case, I just have 3 in right now. But you're going to want to find all those. It's kind of more than you'd think. But go ahead and pop those off. Alright, and also I want to note that if you're at this point in a fully assembled car, you're going to want to have drained all the coolant out. And also don't forget to remove your automatic transmission cooler lines from the radiator. But once all of that's out of the way, go ahead and we'll pull that out of the car. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and pull that factory condenser out of the way. You're going to want to properly evacuate your system and then go ahead and pull the lines off of it. Then you'll notice there's 2 10mm headed bolts holding these top mounts in. I'm going to go ahead, pull those out. And then this kind of slides out and pulls up. Alright, so next we're going to want to go ahead and remove the factory condenser rubber isolator mounts, and a little silicone spray will help get that little nipple out of the core support there. Going to go ahead and lift up on the front, work that out of the hole. It keeps it indexed. Alright, cool. Pulled them both out, kept them intact in case I need them for a project later. These are nice to have, these factory rubber pieces. Alright, so now that we've got all that original stuff out of the way, it's time to start mounting that new condenser. The first step of that is going to be grabbing this lower mount out of the kit, and we're going to put it in place. We need to drill some holes for mounting this in the car. Alright, so to start this process, I'm going to go ahead and place this bracket into place with these kind of semi-octagonal shaped parts going into the recesses in the core support. Now next they want you to go ahead and mark down through there to drill a hole, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully poke this 3/16 drill bit down through the hole and just dimple that metal. Alright, now we can see where I need to drill through. So I'm going to go ahead and do so. And I'm going to complete this 3/16 hole. And then they want you to go ahead and take it to 5/16 for the final mounting holes. Just want to quickly check and make sure everything's in the right place before I drill that final hole size. It's looking good. So let's go ahead and switch to that 5/16. Alright, let's go ahead and look at this one more time. Make sure everything's good to go. And it's looking nice. Cool. Alright, so now that we've gotten that old AC condenser out of the way and drilled the mounting holes for the new one, let's go ahead and put that new one together. Alright, so the AC condenser in the kit is comprised of several components that we're going to need to pre-assemble before we install it in the car. Now, it's got the lower mount bracket that we saw earlier when I poked the holes in the core support there. There's an upper bracket that also needs to be bolted onto the main core piece here. And then there's 3 pieces of plumbing, as well as this dryer and a bracket for it that also needs to be added. Now, right now, I'm not going to take the fittings off of this dryer. Therefore, I won't be fully assembling all of this plumbing because I want to keep everything capped off since I won't be charging the system for a while. But we'll go ahead and add these brackets and fit this thing into the car and have a look at it. Now, I've got everything arranged in the basic layout that it'll be installed in the car as, but they give you kind of a couple options. So these brackets can either be mounted in the front of the core support or behind, depending on the thickness and core size of your radiator. So if you look in the instructions, they explain how to do this either way. I'm going to go ahead and assemble it for a larger core just to give me some room, and we'll check that out next. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I've flipped the core over, so we're kind of looking at the engine side of the thing right now. And the way you need to make sure you orient this thing is with the number 6 fitting on the bottom and with the number 8 fitting on top. So when you start adding brackets and stuff, you're going to want to make sure that is as it is. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to want to go ahead and install is this lower bracket. Now, you got to keep in mind, if you're installing this stuff in the other arrangement, the dryer accumulator bracket kind of layers up with this stuff. So if you're doing it like that, just keep that in mind. But in my case, I'm going to be putting this on the back side of this condenser core, and they include hardware. They've got these little machine screws along with some star washer nuts to go with that. So I'm just going to get one of these started here. Alright, and there's 4 we're going to go ahead and install across the bottom in total. Alright, so I've got all these started. It's got a little bit of adjustment side to side, but I'm just going to go ahead and cinch it down in the middle position. If I need to adjust it later, I'll have to loosen it up and mess with that. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and install this upper bracket. Now I'm going to flip this around to install this. But what you want to keep in mind is this longer protrusion on this bracket goes on the same side as that longer protrusion on the lower bracket, and along with the hookup points on the core itself. Alright, and for right now I'm going to go ahead and adjust this one to the middle too. Cinch these down. Alright, so now that the mounting brackets are on, we're going to go ahead and flip this over one more time in order to install that dryer bracket. It's going to position right here, and it's fastened with 4 machine screws as well. Alright, and at this point you'd typically go ahead, oil up your O-rings and install this dryer into the system. Once again, I'm not going to break the seal on this just yet because it is full of desiccant and it's very humid if you can't tell, and I don't want to use this up quite yet. So I'm going to go ahead and mount it in place, and then we'll mock this thing up in the car. Alright, so we'll go ahead and kind of pull this bracket out of the way, slide this in, and the way that you're going to make sure you have this in the correct orientation height wise is to actually use the line. So in my case, I'll just kind of visualize it. That looks like it's about right. I'm going to go ahead, take this 1/4 inch nut with a star washer on it that they supply, go ahead and clamp it down. Go ahead and straighten this out. Put it in the right spot and cinch this down a little bit. Just make sure it's secure and in the right place. Looking good. All right, so back over here at the core support, and chances are yours might be kind of like mine. Sometimes they get hit from underneath. Maybe yours is, maybe it's not, but if your condenser won't fit in place, like it hits the top here, go ahead, take a wood clamp, assemble it backwards into the spreader position, and just go ahead and don't feel shy to plant the bottom right where this thing's going to sit, and then put the top up against where the structure's doubled and just crank on it a little bit, because once again these things can get hit from underneath, and I guess it just kind of pinches everything in place just a touch, and this is a really close tolerance fit with this condenser. Alright, so I've got the assembly over here. I'm going to go ahead and carefully position the bottom in place. Make sure it's fully seated on the bottom, and then I'm going to prop the top in. There it goes. We've got it settled in place, and now it's time to go ahead and use the factory upper mount locations to secure the top. Alright, now that I've got it in place, I've got the bottom kind of situated where it needs to be. I'm noticing that my stock mounting holes aren't quite lining up, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to loosen all these Phillips head fasteners just a little bit. That's the beauty of those star washer nuts, is they give you the ability to just kind of manipulate one side of the deal and be able to loosen it up and tighten it back up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, move this guy around until it's lined up perfectly, and once it's right, I'm going to go ahead and start one of these factory 10mm headed bolts into the hole, mounting it up to the core support. Go ahead and start it in just a little bit, then I'll go ahead and put the other one in there. Now that the top's mounted in place, I'm going to use these included 1/4-inch bolts with 3/8 heads and flange washers built in to go ahead and secure the bottom through the holes we drilled before. Alright, and once those bolts are in, we'll go ahead and take a 3/8 ratcheting wrench and cinch them down. If your car is still intact and this thing is above the ground a good bit, you could probably easily get a ratchet and socket in there, but this just fits in my instance. Alright, so I was looking at this thing after I installed it, and one thing I noticed is with the condenser installed in this position, the dryer is like up against this cross brace, as well as the bottom kind of area of the condenser bracket and the core itself. So what I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to put it in the alternate position with the brackets in the front of the core, and just kind of see how that fits with my radiator over there. And so I'm going to go ahead, change it around, check it out, and we'll see how it fits. I think if I needed to run it forward like this, I'd want to go ahead and remove that cross brace in the kind of the front of the core here, the core support that is, and maybe even make some spacers and just kind of space it out, trying to, you know, still trying to clear this piece here. But let me reposition it and we'll see how it fits in there. Alright, I've got the condenser core back over here, and I'm going to go ahead, move those brackets around, try it back out in the car. Have to go ahead and pull the dryer bracket off of here. All right, cool. Got it all set up. Let's go fit it in the car. All right, we'll go ahead and position this back in here. All right, go ahead and stick a bolt in the bottom. Top's all nice and secure. Put one more in the bottom. Perfect. All right, cool. So I've got the condenser mounted in the other orientation. And so you can see the brackets are in front of the condenser. And just kind of looking at the front here, I'm going to poke through the grill. It's still pretty tight. However, I do think that the plumbing would probably fit. If it were routed right against the condenser there, I think that would fit behind that kind of cross X bar brace there. And so I guess that would work pretty well. What I want to do next is I want to go ahead and try putting my AFCO radiator over there that I pulled out earlier in here and just make sure everything clears. So that way we'll know if you really need to move it forward and possibly remove or space that X brace up or out, and or if you just don't have to. So let's check that out next. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put this down onto the rubber isolators. There we go. It's nice and settled in, and that's fitting great. Install that. Cool. Go ahead and stick a bolt in this cover just to hold everything in place. All right, cool. So it's all cinched in place, and everything seems to be fitting just fine. Let's see, we can kind of look in there, and maybe you can tell everything's cleared. And go over to the front. Looks like everything's got room and it's looking good. So I think that's the way I'd do it. I couldn't imagine a radiator that would need any more room than this one in front of itself, and that seems to fit pretty great. That looks good. That's a whole assembly there. So as far as putting the front of the car together, in my particular case, I've had a lot of trouble. I don't know if my core is twisted. It still has the factory X brace on it, so I can't imagine it being twisted, but I had to slide the top and bottom brackets all the way oppositely. Not sure, you might have that problem, but I want to show you, looking on the instructions here, it looks like they have like a brand new core support that they're using to set all this stuff up. And it looks like that EDP primer that is on pretty much all replacement panels. But it has no X. And so I don't know if that has to do with the fitment. Maybe the prototype was twisted or something, or mine's twisted, don't know. This is a fairly new kit, and sometimes you get that with new products. They're just not quite all the way finished, but they're able to get them out the door. Not sure, but it's pretty much gone all together. And you know, if you work on cars, you know, sometimes you have to enlarge a hole or bend something or even cut and weld something. All right, so it's nice to have that installed in the front there. Unfortunately for my car, I'm not gonna be able to do all the AC plumbing at this time. I'm getting my car all ready to mock up the supercharged engine in the car so that I can start messing with doing motor plates and headers. Y'all wanna tune in later and check that stuff out. But before I call it a video, I do want to go over some of the wiring stuff, which I'm also not going to fully install, but I kind of want to show y'all how some of that hooks up. So let's check that out next. All right, so I'm back over here at the bench with the wiring harness that came with the kit, and I've got it laid out here. A lot of this is plug and play. You're going to want to go through the instructions. They have you pull the wiring off of the circuit breaker here just for the installation. Once you've run the wiring through the firewall, you'll want to go ahead and reattach this, and then run the single wire to the battery itself, making this wire from the circuit breaker to the battery as short as possible, and also route it as safely as you can, just so that you avoid shorting it out because it's unprotected between the battery and the circuit breaker itself. I really do like this very patriotic red, white, and blue harness here. This is really nice. One thing that is worth talking about is this little harness. So there's like in a little accoutrement pack that comes with the wiring, and this red, white, and green harness is in here, and it plugs in right here. And along with this red, white, and blue harness, it's gathered up in this taped section here. This is actually also going to, with this, poke through the firewall. Okay, so back over here at the car, here's the firewall cover, and here are the tubes for the heater core. The AC core tubes would poke through these holes, and this is where the wiring is going to come through. Now, as I mentioned before, that red, white, and blue harness comes through here, as well as this red, green, and white harness. And so that's going to stick through here. And the purpose of this one is to hook up to the heater control valve, which is going to allow or stop the flow of hot water through the heater core from the engine. And so when you plumb this, you want to take note of these arrows on the side, and that is the direction that the water is supposed to flow through this valve. So that's important, and you want to get this right. This will be mounted to the top tube via a length of hose on the heater core here, and once you've got all that hooked up, this plugs right into this green, red, and white harness. Alright, now another important part of the wiring for an AC system is this thing called a binary switch, and this threads right into the front of the dryer that's mounted to the condenser at the front of the car. And what it does is it's a safety switch which interrupts the signal to the actual refrigerant compressor on the engine when the internal pressure is too high or too low. So like if everything's leaked out, all the refrigerant's leaked out, or if for some reason it's over full or over pressured or something, this turns off the compressor. Now they include this binary switch with the kit and this connector, which just kind of goes over like that and has those two terminals on the inside. You can also get what's called a trinary switch, and you would use that to activate an electric fan when the pressure inside is pressurized from the compressor, meaning that the AC system is in use. So it would activate that fan to cool the condenser at the front of the car. Now, just kind of looking through the instructions here, this actually hooks up to the blue wiring that kind of goes through the firewall into the front of the car. You're going to wire this in. So the blue wire is going to go to this, and then from this you're going to run this wire. I guess you can cut it and splice it to this harness, or maybe you can plug it right into the switch with this female kind of spade connector here. And then this end is going to hook up to the positive wire on the compressor. Alright, and so I'm over here at the engine that's got my AC compressor mounted to it right now. And just to kind of show you, I've brought the blue wire over. Your AC compressor, pretty much all of them will typically have this male connector on it, and that's just going to plug into the blue wire like so. And then once again, this will run to that binary or an optional trinary switch on your condenser at the front of the car. And then that blue wire will run from the rest of the harness inside the car as part of the wiring for the AC kit. Alright, so since we've covered pretty much everything that goes into the engine compartment, just to kind of look over the rest, this cluster of wires and this plug is going to plug into the ECU of the unit, and that's actually at the top of the unit inside the car. It'll be under the dash once that's installed, and I'll show you where this goes in just a second. This is going to go to the blower motor. It's got a plug like the fan blower motor for the air. It's got a plug down on the unit as well, and we'll check that out in a second too. You'll have to find a place to mount this relay under the dash, probably somewhere on the cowl, and that's just something you'll just kind of have to look at. The instructions just say find a suitable place, and then after that we're going to get into these loose wires. Now this gray one is for programming controls, and I think it's like an optional thing. They say the yellow and orange ones that are capped off here are not used, but these two are really important. So this tan one is for backlighting of the control panel, and this purple one is actually to turn the unit on. So this is going to go to a keyed source or to the original AC system on wire. And actually that original wire is powered with a 25 amp fuse, and they want you to change that out to a 5 amp since it's not giving the main power to the system, which this red wire is. It's just turning it on. So they actually include a fuse. I think I've got it sitting right here with the kit. So they actually include a 5 amp fuse, and they want you to switch that out just because if you do need that fuse for a short or anything like that, they want it to be safe for the smaller wire, or actually this smaller wire controlling that on circuit, not necessarily the full power circuit. So that's basically how all these are hooked up in the car. The next thing I want to cover is this, and I think this is really cool. So this is their control panel. You know, it's got, you know, all your sliders and controls, and it looks a lot like the factory piece. It has their logo on it, and it just bolts right in the dash, which is nice. Now the wiring on this is really simple. It's a plug and play harness that's going to go right into the ECU of the unit, right next to this plug. And so let me go ahead and we'll go over to the unit that's mounted in the car, and I'll kind of show you where these go. Alright, so back inside the car here, here's the unit kind of mounted into the cowl area here. And I just kind of want to quickly show you, this is where that main harness plugs in, and then this is going to be where that control panel plugs in. So those cluster plugs will just go right here. And then here is one of the connections, like for the blower motor. And let's go ahead and take a look at the dash next. Alright, so here's the dash. I just set it on the trunk for now to get it out of the way. But here's the original control panel for the AC stuff. And I pulled all this wiring out earlier in the video. But basically, it's got a couple clips on the unit that just kind of stay with it. And it's got this one that actually plugs into all the wiring that's kind of connected to the original AC unit. And then it's got this brown wire which connects into the harness up in this upper left corner. And this is the main power for all the AC stuff. So this is what you would want to go ahead and tap into if you just wanted to use that factory accessory power wire. And then if you trace it over, it actually goes to this fuse box, and let me see if I can find it. If you see here, kind of near the emergency flasher bulb there, there's a fuse labeled AC, and it's got this white 25 amp fuse plugged into it. And so that's the one you'd want to go ahead and pull out and change to that 5 amp if you want to go ahead and use this wire. And there's a whole bunch of stuff going in the back. I could pull this all apart and show you, but it's that same brown wire, and it just goes directly right here. Again, brown wire, and that's what you'd hook that violet power wire up to for the new Vintage Air unit. Alright, and speaking of that new Vintage Air unit, here's the new Vintage Air control panel. And again, that's just going to drop in just kind of like the original one right here. And the bezel that goes over the radio and all that is going to cover that up. Mounts right in, and once again, this harness on the back has this plug that's going to plug into the unit. This will plug along with that main harness right there, and just clicks in easy as that. Alright, I also want to go ahead and just kind of point out wiring for the backlighting stuff. So there's a light that goes into the factory control panel right in that corner there, and that is going to be wired with a gray positive wire. This black is a ground, and you're going to want to tap into this gray circuit. So on a GM, the dash lighting is this light gray color, and so that tan wire that serves to power the backlighting for the Vintage Air system is going to tap into this gray wire from GM, and that's fused and everything and comes on with the running lights. So to get that backlight, you're going to want to tap into the gray. Now, as for the dash itself, unfortunately I won't be able to reinstall that in this video. I'd like to show y'all everything, but I have a lot of work to do on this car, and a lot of stuff to move around and do final installation on. But what I would suggest is to go ahead and just fully remove that steering column. In order to do that, you're going to take out this bolt in the column, and then you're going to probably have to tap this down. It's a really tight fit, and sometimes it rusts and sticks. That's to remove the steering shaft itself. We've already undone the main hanger here on the front, but what we will need to do is there's a few bolts on this kind of oddly shaped firewall plate that you're going to have to take out, and then that will allow you to go ahead and fully remove the steering column. And the reason I suggest to do that for reinstallation of the dash is not only will it get that out of the way, but also once you put the dash back in, and screw it in up here. Also, I want to note that the defrost ducting from Vintage Air, that's going to screw here where that original kind of ducting was mounted originally, and it's going to plumb to these fittings using their supplied hose in the kit. But the reason the column's good to pull out for putting the dash in, and honestly it'd be better to take it out honestly, is just so that you can get the wiring kind of situated where it's draped over the column from driver's side to passenger side. Remember, like all the lights and windshield wiper stuff plugs in on this side. That wiring kind of goes over the column, and then the key switch and all that kind of stuff plugs in on top. So it's just nice to have that out of the way. You can put the column back in after the dash goes in, kind of lay it down on the seat or on the floor, plug all that stuff back in, and then prop it up and bolt it in place with this mount that we pulled out earlier. And then you'll have a full reinstallation, and it'll just be a little easier to hook all that wiring up and get everything put back together. So if you're planning to do a full installation of this kit on your car, there's a lot of instructions that come with all the different parts of the kit, and they're all helpful, and they cover pretty much all these steps. It wants you to run 50/50 antifreeze, which, honestly, on an NHRA sanctioned drag strip, they don't want you to run a glycol coolant. That's something I am looking into, and there are alternatives. I'm looking into VP, Stay Frosty, and some other stuff that I'm considering for my application. But they want that probably to preserve the heater core, this piece inside. They don't want it to get all corroded. It needs to be charged with 1.8 pounds or 28.8 ounces of R134A, so you can't use R12 or any of that stuff, but really it's exponentially easier to get 134A than any of that other stuff these days anyway. They say sanding compressors typically charged with oil or filled with oil and all that, so you won't need to add any other oil other than just to lubricate those O-rings. It goes over all this stuff, and just kind of how to set it all up and stuff like that. In addition to the supplied instructions, they also have a really good instructional video on their YouTube channel, Vintage Air does, and they do the installation on a Monte Carlo SS G Body, so you might want to check that out. Some of the stuff that I just did, especially with the dash removal, is specific to the Cutlass. So hopefully if you have a Cutlass and you're looking for help or information, hopefully this video is helpful. But regardless, I've got a lot of stuff to do on this car. Still messing with the Nova and all the other projects, so really hope you guys enjoyed tuning in. Hope you tune in next time. I'll be covering plumbing this and wiring it and all sorts of stuff later in the upcoming weeks and months, so hope you guys are looking forward to checking that out. But until then, really appreciate you guys watching, liking, and especially subscribing. I want to thank you guys for checking out the videos, and also like to hear from you in the comments. But we'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Thanks for watching.